Cal, you've been at the University of Minnesota for
22 years almost.
22. I was
Yeah,
going to
full
say
time.
at least a couple decades.
Yeah.
So and then obviously you've been in that area for a long time. So you've had opportunities to train high school kids. Obviously, a long list of really high level college players, and then because of the caliber of players you're getting, a lot of them are coming back to train in the off season as they continue on their professional careers. So, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of their training as some of those players progress across their careers, and maybe what you see that's unique when they're hitting the professional level compared to when you first get them as high school kids?
Yeah, right. Like I guess the big thing is, I think the perception a lot of people think is that, hey, a guy goes in the NHL and he's able to train even maybe a little bit more. But as you know, as an NHL strength coach, the season is so hard. In season, the training, it's not like in college I can train a guy during the week, and on the weekends we play the games, where you guys play so many games and those guys are so tired. I mean, it's something you have to be amazingly aware of as an NHL strength coach, right? And that the travel, all the factors that come into play, people don't understand. So the crazy thing is it's just managing those guys' stress levels and kind of educating them with the professional athletes. But how the whole thing's evolved is, like, these guys go into the NHL and I'm telling them, hey, when you leave here, you're not going to be able to train like this because you're going to be tired. And that's the crazy thing. So the exercises that people think may see a freshman do to get better when he comes into college would be out of the question as an NHL. But they should already have that power and strength that we're trying to get, right? So the evolution of it going to more advanced is, especially in season, there's a huge difference, I think, especially at the college and the pros. Again, 80 some games. I don't know of another sport that's that physically hard. I'll be honest with you. I mean, football's once a week, right? Games, but the 82 games, especially then you make a playoff run, as you guys have, you're going, I mean, that could be 20 some games of the highest level intensity they've ever felt in their life, right? So the catch with all this is you're sitting here going, holy buckets, just the training alone. But the evolution, I think, over the years, we're getting a little bit more wiser in regards to the exercise selection, especially due to the internet. I mean, it just gives us more opportunity. Like the stuff you're posting, I mean, when to apply it, how it's going to work for a guy, or when a guy might actually need that. Especially, I think, as I see your exercises, a lot of examples in return to play to get that guy just a level of proficiency that he was before he was hurt and left because of his injury, right, for a little bit, and then that's probably when you probably get to train guys the most, right, in the return to play, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an opportunity there to really dive deep on what the player needs, and you have more time. And to your point, it's a little bit more of you can push a little bit more of the off-ice training stress because the competition load obviously is removed if they're not playing, but then also their on-ice load from a practice standpoint typically isn't as higher early on. So you can really spend some more time with the player and making sure you're addressing their needs, but putting a little more water under the bridge from a training volume standpoint in general, just to account for the fact that they're not getting the on-ice stress, but then also as a strategy to help keep their overall volume of stress at a reasonably high level so that it makes for a smoother transition as they start to ramp up on the ice.
Yeah, right. You'd hate them to be out of shape and not be able to handle that new load. And it's not new. It's something they've done their whole lives, but they've been removed, right? So how do you see how do you have that work where you ramp that up? And do you look at their weaknesses, and then do you feel like you get to train the rest of the body where, let's say a kid's hurt his ankle, whatever it may be, high ankle sprain, it's 4 to 6 probably, right? Maybe you guys do it faster, I don't know. But ultimately then, he's got a weak upper body. You ramp up the upper body in that section, at that point.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, as you kind of alluded to, as players' careers progress, they don't have as prominent of limiting factors as they do early on. You might get a 19-year-old kid that's came in, maybe doesn't have a lot of training experience at all, is just, a gifted player from a skill standpoint and, maybe the way he sees the game, whatever, but he's progressed to a point that he's in our building, but has not started to develop the off-ice habits that are going to allow him to really excel and be consistent on a day-to-day basis. So, I think that those injury opportunities are exactly that. They're opportunities to really take a big chunk out of a player's, maybe most limiting factor, so that when they come back, not only is the injury healed, and obviously we're strategically ramping up to make sure that the joint, the tissue, whatever the injury was, that is durable to not just come back but stay back. But then also you have that window of time to really aggressively go after whatever their primary limiting factor is.
Yeah, and it's crazy, right? So a lot of people think that all our athletes, and you and I actually get athletes the same age sometimes, right? Because you might get a top draft pick that's on there at 19, right, 20.
Sure.
And I'll get the same at 20, 19, 20-year-old kids coming in from juniors. But, I mean, it's crazy how people believe that, oh, he's got to be strong and gifted, and he moves well on the ice, but they're actually not. And it's profound, because the perception is that, hey, this guy's got everything, and really the upswing, because if you can just get him stronger, a little bit more powerful, because he can already play the game. I've always said hockey's the most dynamic sport in the world, if you think about it. The energy systems are used. Most sports have a very specific one. I mean, you need all three in hockey. Not that you don't in other sports, but it is so taxed in hockey, all three energy systems. And then the speed and the skill of the game. I tell people, I tell my friends, like, if you just look at our college women, and if the puck was a basketball, really, the women's college hockey game is faster than the NBA. Not that they're better athletes. It's just the game is so fast because it's on ice. Sure. And it's skating. So, and then the hand-eye coordination that takes place, to see these guys, what they do at skating down the ice at 18 miles an hour, to catch a 50-mile-an-hour pass, to put it in a little 4-inch spot.
Sure.
That's pretty crazy, right? As you see that. But again, getting back to the advanced athletes at 19 years old, there's so much that we can do with them physically. If they're there with us, they're probably already skilled, right?
Sure.
So the magic is it's really the skill set of hockey, and the brain is the beautiful thing. You know what I mean? Now, some other athletes that aren't as athletic, so I find that if they're athletic and they're really skilled at hockey, I can get them strong fast, right? But ultimately, if they don't get the game and they're not great athletes, then I struggle. So I think all this athleticism, really, what I'm getting to is, I think a lot of people leave the brain factor out of this thing. You know what I mean? You got to have a great brain and the coordination. And with that being said, like, I think the upswing in these kids, as long as they can play the game, the physical part we can take care of, right?
Sure. No, I think that is one of the things that makes hockey unique, is that there are so many different ways that a player can be elite. Sometimes it's pure physical gifts. They just fly on the ice, and that speed allows them to create enclosed space that at a level that allows them to compete at a Division I or a professional level. There's other guys that they succeed despite their athletic gifts. The way that they see the game, they can anticipate opponents' motion, their teammates' motion, so their decision making is so much more effective than other players, that they can succeed that way despite having the polar opposite physical profile as another player. And there's nowhere, one of the other things that, when you're talking about a player that's really skilled, that's reaching a certain level, that is not well developed physically, there's nowhere where that idea comes to mind more than at the NHL Combine, where you have the top 100 players that are draft eligible that year that show up. And there's always this question of, the guys that jump the highest and, have the best Wingate peak power, whatever the organization prioritizes, the players that perform the best on those tests tend to get the most coverage and the most recognition, when the reality may be that if a player is at that level and in that group and physically is way behind everybody, that player may have a higher ceiling, and that may be a more interesting prospect to take on. And, there's some the questions arise, well, why is he so far behind everybody? Is it because there's no work ethic and he thinks everything else doesn't matter? And there can be some behavioral problems that would need to be sniffed out, but purely from, if hockey's a 9 out of 10 and physically is a 1 out of 10, there's probably more upside for that player than if they're both 9s out of 10.
I will take that every time. Yeah. Agreed. Because there's so much upswing and we can control more. I tell people, if the guy isn't a great hockey player and I make him faster, he's just going to the wrong spot faster.
Yeah.
That's what I tell people.
He's going to win the race to the wrong spot.
Right. He's just going to the wrong spot. And, well, with you mentioning the fact that like guys making plays, whether he's not physical there in regards to have the qualities, but he can just think the game. Like the information processing of hockey players. Like people have no idea the magnitude. Like, and sometimes I think the elite players don't even realize they see what other people don't. Like, hey, I saw this guy with his stick in this position. I knew that the play was going to happen like this. And you're like, well, not everybody picks that up.
Sure.
Because the game's going really fast, right? And that's the scary thing. And the question is, maybe that's a test that needs to be taken consideration, because if you can process information, and look at the NHL Combine, they're all processing information at a speed, but the elites might be at another higher level.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
No, I mean, that's one of the things working professionally that's really stood out to me, is that you hear these conversations between players in between periods, and it's, when I drift into this position, I see this guy moves here, and then this guy puts a stick in this spot, so it's going to open up this lane. So next time we're in that spot, take a step back and you'll be wide open and I'll hit you there. And those are all pieces that, one, I don't think that level of detail and attention is necessarily appreciated. You just see them make the play, but you don't know that they're seeing it, talking about it, breaking down even the most subtle nuances of where a guy's putting his stick on the ice and when you're drifting in a certain position. So all of that incredibly important. But the other thing I think of is when you watch the game as a fan, you're getting a top-down view and you can see where everybody is and where they're moving and about how fast they're going. And, it's easy from the stands to see the right play every single time. And, I saw some footage, I don't even remember which show it was, but you watch an NFL football game, and it's another good example where, they show the top-down view and the quarterback drops back and he hits a guy that's wide open on the side, and you're like, wow, he hit the wide open guy. How hard was that? But then they switch camera angles and they show you the view from behind the quarterback. You realize the guy can't see over his own offensive line. There's people coming, converging on him from all angles, and he has 3 seconds to read all of the guys in the backfield and then anticipate where that guy's going to be. A lot of times, obviously, in that sport, throwing the ball before the guy actually makes the cut to get into the position where he's supposed to be. So, there's definitely a degree of that in hockey too, where when you start to see the game from the player's eyes, you really appreciate how much goes into the decision-making side of things and how gifted some of those players really are.
Right. And I think the best way I think we could put it for the fans is like, you get to see the whole field, as you mentioned, but let's take half the field away, because somebody can only see peripherally half the field, right? The player can't. So you're going, you imagine trying to see how the game's going when you're only getting to see half of it?
Sure.
Because that's what they live in. But they make split-second decisions that and the NFL analogy, I mean, the quarterbacks, I've talked to a quarterback coach before, but you're sitting here going, they walk up to that line and before the ball snapped, they may make 17 reads and know that this guy's 2 steps too far, so they change the pass play so they know the guy's going to be open here, and the receiver sees it, or just they don't say a word and they read it.
Yeah.
And the court, and hockey's a much more flow, but as you said with hockey, I mean, they'll make some passes that you don't know if the guy's going to be there, but they know their guy's going to be there. Sure. Normal team, that's the cohesiveness, right, of this whole thing. The magic in hockey is when you know where your guy's going to be, your line mate, your teammate, you go, he's going to be there. I'm going to get this and make the pass. I'm going to watch it as it leaves my stick. But that pass has been made before the puck has come, because my guy's there. Sure. I mean, that's the magic. I don't know if the fans truly always appreciate all that at that level. You know what I mean? That's beautiful.
Let's pivot a little bit. We've brought up speed and the importance of speed in higher level sport a couple times, and it was your book, Triphasic Training, that you and Ben Peterson put together that I think was my first exposure to this idea of really kind of riding to the right of the force velocity curve, meaning starting to integrate lower load, higher velocity exercises into your training program, other than, traditionally it's you want to get faster, you have to sprint, maybe you're doing some jumping work, but there's a lot more to it than that, obviously. So, can you talk a little bit about kind of your evolution into that space? And then one of the things that really jumps out to me that, again, I think was a concept you first introduced me to was the importance of the speed of relaxation as a limiting factor on speed output.
Yeah, well, man, I'd like to say I thought of the whole concept of lighter loads, but I stumbled.
I'm gonna give you full credit
Yeah,
anyway. So
well, I just stumbled onto it with my track coach, right? Like, because like in the traditional training methods, as you know, we kind of got it from the peaking models from weightlifting and powerlifting per se, let's say, and they're great sports, but their objective is to move something really heavy, right? So then, it's like 20 years ago. My coach was like, maybe 21 even now that I think about it. Let's him and I were talking. I'm like, well, why don't we try to peak them instead of going heavy at 90% where they're moving the weight slow? Let's just peak them at a lower, like 70, 75, maybe even 65. And we got some pretty crazy results with the kids that we'd already been training for years. Well, we knew it worked with our older guys for sure. The young guys, we weren't sure because everything usually works at the young age, right? Where when you just get into the training. So yeah, I would like to say I was pretty smart in creating that, but then, so I tell people, hey, so we went from peaking at 90, 92% to 70, 65%. What's the next question? Well, the next question is to go, maybe if I move it even lower, I'll get even more results. Well, guess what, Kevin? Took me 8 years to ask that question, right? So it's a little frustrating, you know? I'm like, man, well, yeah, because I laid it out to people and they go, well, if you went lower, then you probably got some results. I'm like, yeah, but it only took me 8 years.
Yeah.
Because, hey, I got some great results. We're going, oh, we're going to peak this way now. Well, if I would have asked the next question. So, but I'm learning, right? I tell people, I'm in a lot of these lectures, I tell them, like, I'm here because I've made a lot of mistakes. Right? That's what you're paying me for,
Yeah.
To lecture here. And you want to come here because I've made so many mistakes and I'm willing to admit them, right? Some people don't like that, but I'll make it. And I'm going to get you through those faster than it took me to get 2 decades worth of mistakes cleared off the table. And then, so the relaxation thing, and again, the Soviets really figured that out probably in the 70s. I think it was Medvedev. And when they analyzed the most elite athletes on world Olympic teams, where the best in the world, and then the guys on the Olympic team are on that team, what separated them? They couldn't really find anything, not VO2 max, power output, except that they relaxed their muscles faster. So with the relaxation, and really it's an indicator of some level of coordination, as we know. And the relaxation, and when I see a athlete moving, that, and I tell people that it's kind of magical. And like our young strength coaches may not see that, what you and I see when an athlete's magically moving. And when they say, well, what do you mean? Well, when this athlete moves, it's like it's really fast, it's powerful, but it's like a dance versus just hammering the ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that it could be violent ballerinas is something you would look at, right? That's it. Well, they have that relaxation, right? Ballerinas are magical at it, but our advanced athletes. And you and I know we could walk into any high school and see the 2 guys that relax the best when they're moving because they're great movers. So the thing about relaxation is that it's just an indicator. And I think the reason the muscle needs to relax fast is so that the rest of the muscles doing the work at the moment, and this is split seconds, like interaction, right, between the muscles, will produce more power, and actually even more power with less activation because everything's synced together and it's like all the pistons are working. And that athlete has that at that day, in that moment. So I was always trying to figure out what's the best way to train that. If that's the most advanced, if I can just get my basic athletes, maybe not make them the best in the world, but I just need an edge, right? And that was the magic. And that obviously starts in the brain, as we know. You know what I mean? So those athletes are able to shift from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state in most cases. So when I say that for people listening, you can get into a squat rack, and let's say your heart rate goes up to 190, 200. Well, one of my elite wrestlers once, in 30 seconds, he was down to 68. So he could go from a really high level to a really low level of control through his parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. And most of those athletes that move like that also have that control, right? So it's not just the muscle relaxing itself, it's the broad system, right? And you can see that. You can maybe even identify those with certain personalities. People that are more relaxed, they seem to be in control and relaxed, right? Michael Jordan was a competitor, but he looked pretty relaxed most of the time when he moved, right?
Sure.
And I use that as an example where those athletes, the relaxation factor is one of the I would say one of the key components in being, let's say in the hockey world, to me, to being an elite athlete. I would say the other one that I've always tested was kilos per body weight, power produced per kilogram, right? That's always an indicator that I got something. And then to be able to repeat the sprinting, right? So yes, athletes that are high in kilograms per power, and then be able to reproduce that and relax their muscles, they can just keep sprinting throughout the game, and they actually seem like they're more conditioned. I don't know if they are. They just use less energy because they're so efficient.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there that jump out. I mean, one, your point about using less energy, they're not fighting against as much internal resistance, but then also they're not, because the contraction time is faster, the relaxation time is faster, they're not staying active and on for as long, so they're not using as much energy to do it. But then you're right that, there is this integration. I think people kind of look at like speed and conditioning almost as separate concepts, where if you are moving in a way that's more efficient, you're utilizing less energy, which means you can go for longer, right? Or that you can repeat it more often. So, I think the idea of, being able to get into positions and having the range of motion and control to do that, but then also producing the right amount of force at the right speed for whatever you need to do and no more is key to expressing at the highest level of conditioning possible. And you see, I certainly there's, kind of like the plow horse, racehorse analogy, and some of those guys that just hold on to a lot of tension and are, a little bit more plodding and pushers in the way that they skate or the way that they move. They do, you can do all the conditioning in the world, but if they don't learn to like decrease some of that internal tension that they're working against, they're kind of emptying burning the candle from both ends. And
right? Like you see it on your monitoring systems. You see those type of guys that are just burning so many calories. I mean, you see it every day, right? Like, and then, I know, well, you did your PhD on the catapult, right? So, I know some other systems that I use, especially for one of my female athletes. She looks like a water bug out there, but she was so efficient at skating. When you look at her loads, they were low.
Yeah.
And well, there's another reason for that, which the reason why she was there, she's about 150 pounds. And let's just pretend I'm just north of 250 in my weight, okay? But we did this foot exercise where I'd try to break her and push on her. And she would laugh at me because she's in this really awkward position with her foot. I call them spring ankles. And she would laugh at me because I couldn't budge her. And I tell people in skating and even in running, her feet were so strong that all those, when your feet are stable, all the muscles running up the chain through the legs are so in control and able to relax that she has less tension running through her body, even though she's moving and flying around. And coaches didn't believe me that our loads weren't that high. Now, the magic of that is, as you know, the guys that play hard, that are out there working, that don't show as much load, let's say on the catapult or whatever system you're using, they make it through the season because they're getting each game isn't as much as the guy beside him that you're saying is holding the tension. So over 80, maybe 100 games, the other guy's really beat up and worn out, and the tissues only have so much ability to tolerate over the course of the season, where the other guy, I'm not saying in playoffs he's not banged up, because as you know, everybody is, right? It's all Stanley Cup's the hardest thing to win in sports physically. Let's be honest.
yeah.
They're not as beat up, and you see that. And those players, hopefully, they're smart hockey players. They might be around a little bit longer because they can just hold up without getting injured and just worn out over time.
So the natural question then, because obviously we just spent several minutes talking about how incredibly important the capacity to relax, and not just on a systemic level, but then even more on a joint specific muscular level. The question then is that a quality that can be developed? So
Yeah.
Interested to hear your thoughts on, if that, I guess twofold. One, how would a player or how would another strength and conditioning coach identify that as a major limiting factor for a player? And then two, from a training standpoint, what's the strategy there to start to make some improvements?
Well, I think you and I together could probably teach a whole weekend course on just this last 5 minutes, right? Like if we really dug in, right? So Kev, where I noticed it in years ago is really it was the oscillatory movement. So instead of doing a full range of motion bench press, we had light dumbbells, and it was actually on two kids that ended up in my track team that ran the world's fastest time like 2 weeks apart. And we were doing oscillatory movements, just partial range, which I got from Mel Siff, right? It's a super training book. It's a classic, obviously. And I was able to spend actually 4 days in his home once. And that's a whole nother podcast, right? But the point is those two kids, and they were elite. They ended up run the world's fastest time, 2 weeks apart, making world teams. When they did this movement, we actually, with like 30-pound dumbbells, as fast as they possibly could, short range on the dumbbell bench press, we actually had to hold them on the bench press so they would go up in like 3 inches range of motion with 30-pound dumbbells so fast that the momentum, when they reversed, pulled them off the bench. And so these two elite guys and a few other, we had some high jumpers, we had other people, all my best kids needed to be held on the bench. And I didn't know what I was doing back then, but I said, if this has got to be an indicator of something, right? And the thinking is that when I use my chest muscles to push the dumbbell really fast and hard for a split second, and then I want that muscle to shut off. How do I train that? I use my back muscles to pull the dumbbells back to me. So it's a very violent, very fast, and I call them oscillatories, and we'll call them oscillatories from here. And ultimately, you're trying to teach that one muscle to fire fast, and then the reverse muscle, which would be Sheraton's law or the antagonist, teaches that muscle to shut off extremely fast by using so the chest is turned on, and then the back turns on quickly after the chest is turned on to shut the back off. And it's known as Sheraton's law, and I wrote about it in my book, but ultimately that coordinate, and really it's just a skill that's a coordinated skill. And what wins in elite sports is skill. It's not always power. It's a skill. It's the art of what you're doing, right? Whether you're throwing a shot put or making a play or shooting a puck, it's skill related. And the hopes was that I'm creating the ability to learn more skill, not only teach them to relax faster, but I think it's just a higher coordinated level. Because friends of mine that tried it, let's say, and I had friends that were elite powerlifters, because they're good at pushing a heavy weight. Guess what they weren't good at? The oscillatories. Because they've trained, not that they can't be,
Sure,
but moving heavy weight just didn't help with that. So the big thing is, I think, is practicing fast, explosive movements, especially with bands nowadays, because many years ago they didn't have bands, but then getting away from that, actually grinding the heavy weights all the time. You know what I mean? And even in triphasic, people say, oh, it's sport specific. Well, not really, because when you do triphasic with an advanced athlete, it might make them slower for a little bit. The hopes is they get faster later, you know what I mean? But ultimately, isometrics, eccentrics, they'll actually make you an advanced athlete slower. Young kids, everything works,
Sure,
as we know. But ultimately, that's the thinking, is that you can eventually teach them to relax faster. But I have to go to this route too then. Other sports are important to play. I think a kid that learns to play ping pong or plays ping pong or racquetball or any other sport, or lacrosse for hockey, like any other sport, they're just learning new skills, so it wakes up the brain. As you know, we're sitting here, the brain's the most important factor in all this. Not fast twitch muscle fibers.
Yeah.
I want a kid that can learn skills, that has a great brain. When I say that, not that he makes the right choices, right? He has the ability to repeat a skill and do it really well. That's the magic, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my first exposures to research, actually, when I was an undergrad, I helped out at a lab that was looking at the relationship between like learning disabilities and motor skill outputs in elementary school kids. And essentially, it was a long time ago, so I don't remember all the nuances of the work that I was helping with. But I remember that they did find a relationship between the ability to execute basic, catch a ball, hop on one leg. There were a series of very basic movement skills that did relate to the brain function of the kids. And, that just kind of cemented this idea to me that movement obviously it's an expression of brain development, right? So if you are training something, you'll get better at it. But then, also in some of those clinical situations, it's movement is giving you some insight into what's happening here. And I think that is likely a two-way street where,
Right.
you can learn something and you'll move better. But if you're exposed to a lot of different movements, it's going to change your brain to allow you then to,
Right.
open up the opportunity for you to continue to develop and learn other things. So,
Well, I think I know the answer to this. I know people get stuck in certain training methods. Or let's say I love the back squat, and we do a lot of back squatting. But with what you just said, I think you're going to say you would agree with me. But a program that has variabilities in a lot of exercises for athletes, I think is very important. Would you agree?
yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there's a trade-off where, in some of these programs where it's like, all right, we're going to do 12 sets of 3 of one exercise. There's a trade-off where you need, there's load associated with warm-up sets and getting into a spot where you can, produce maximum effort in the actual working sets. So there's a trade-off between not having so many exercises that now 30% of your volume is just warming up to be able to hit the gas on different exercises, but also exposing yourself. If you can create force in different patterns with different stabilization strategies and different coordination requirements, that is likely to transfer to sport, I think, better than just hammering one exercise over and over.
Well, right. I mean, as you said, 12 sets of an exercise. It's really, that came from powerlifting and Olympic lifting, right? And that's their sport. Where if you're doing one exercise, that better be your sport for 12 sets. You know what I mean? But athletes moves in all different directions. And not only is a program where, let's say we do 4 exercise for 3 sets each versus one exercise of 12, like you're developing the brain realistically differently, more like athletic brain, in my opinion, right? So I truly believe I got away from doing 12 sets of something and went to 3 and just changing out exercise. I've gotten much better results. I think you would agree too, right?
Sure.
Yeah, over the years.
So I know I've been fortunate. I've seen you present several times over the last, whatever, it's been 15 years or so that we've known each other. And I know that Metabolic Elite has a seminar coming up in August called the Elite Minds Workshop that you're speaking at. Do you want to touch on a little bit of what your topic's going to be and what you'll be sharing?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the products are pretty profound, especially with the delivery system that Jim's created. But the synapsin, to me, as we've talked enough about our brain and the coordination, I have found increase in the amount of speed and the number of reps my athletes can do. So before they could do 17, 18 reps in about 5 seconds on a high, really fast exercise, they're getting into 21 and 23 repetitions the first day they take it. And that just goes back to the coordination thing, because I think with all the pathways in the brain and everything that's going on and what Jim's created in that supplement, you're going, that's pretty profound results, right? So I'm going to try to take people through and show them the things that we've seen with the results and how to apply it. Maybe if you're not going to take it all the time, this is when you would take the curcumin, right, that Jim's created. And I think I released a blog post on how, hey, I'll go back to the power per kilowatt or kilogram, right? So people are like, well, how do I improve that? Well, you get stronger, more powerful, but don't put on any muscle. Well, I wrote an article about how you can use cold tubs to hinder muscle hypertrophy, but you still want to heal from it. And the TetraCure is the supplement that can help you keep healing versus, let's say, taking an anti-inflammatory, which shuts enzymes down. And you're able, you don't want to take anti-inflammatories to shut those enzymes down from healing, because you're just going to lay down scar tissue. So you want to do it naturally, and that's the magic in this product. So I'm going to show people, hey, here's samples of how I use it with my athletes, and how you can tell them to make sure that they apply things and even get a greater effect about what's going on and in their bodies. And that's the hopes, right? So and then just piggyback off a lot of smart people like you in that conference. It's going to be pretty magical, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just brought up an interesting point that, after a single dose, you have that significant increase in the number of reps that a player can do in a specific exercise. And, presumably over time, training in a way that you're producing more reps every set as, a response to taking the synapsin, that should push the development of that quality even further than doing less reps in that same time, right? So there's not just a short-term acute effect of the benefit of the synapsin. There should be this compounded effect of, training at a higher level consistently over time should lead to a better benefit.
Well, there's over the years, it's shown to be a great benefit to get more repetitions. And I think with this supplement and the benefits is one of the benefits that we're just going to look like better coaches. Let's be honest with you, right? Like that's
as long as we look good.
Yeah, as long as we look good as better coaches, because hey, realistically, if we have a very diverse program, and I'll use the example. I created a drill off actually a psychologist. It was called the Infinity Walks, and I created a drill called the GOAT Performance Drill. And it's just basically, it's a brain warm-up drill. Well, when people use the synapsin, like they feel like they can do that drill better the very first time they walk into it after they've chewed up a tablet. And I know that that's a general rule of thumb. If you're really good at that drill, all my better athletes are good at it. Yeah, I got a young kid that played the 6 most minutes in the NHL this year as a rookie. He's the best I've ever had in that drill. So as a 20-year-old, well, that's a good sign that he's a good athlete, right? You're going, well, if I can just make these people better athletes, right? And this might be a thing that just takes some of the blockers away. And I add the supplement with the drill, and then they go into the weight room and they move things faster. I'm in a really happy level, right? Like I'm looking like a better coach. So we look good then, right?
Yeah. No, that's great. I think strength coaches everywhere will be psyched to get raises thanks to just
let's hope.
Supplying Metabolic Elite products to the athletes. So that's awesome. Cal, this has been a lot of fun.
Always, and I think we could go for hours, but we won't.
We got dinner to eat.
Yeah, so. But we got dinner to eat, and maybe get an arm workout in.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. So, hey, thanks for this is a pleasure. Always, we got to do this more often.
Cool.
Absolutely.